Syracuse has looked pretty good through 2 weeks, and Stanford is coming to the Dome on Friday night.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here in the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are joined by Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House. He does great work there. Check out Inside the Loud House when you are done with this podcast. Once again, Neil Adler does excellent work covering all the teams here at Syracuse. We're going to go over the first 2 weeks of Syracuse football season and what can translate into the Stanford game on Friday night. We're going to give our thoughts on the bye week. We really don't know how this team is going to come out with the bye week under Fran Brown, but we do know how it was under Dino Babers, and it wasn't very good. So hopefully the trend can be bucked with a guy like Fran Brown. And plus, we're going to talk about more about Stanford here on today's show. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Neil, thank you so much for hopping onto the podcast today. So, Stanford coming to the Dome Friday night. I'm sure we're all excited here. Every single one of us, right? What do you want to see more of from Syracuse heading into Friday?
Well, first of all, Jackson, as always, really appreciate you having me on your great podcast. I appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words. I think the main thing for Syracuse, as you mentioned at the open, is, how are they going to come out of the bye week? And, this is the third straight year where they've got off to a nice start, 6-0, 4-0, now 2-0, and let's hope it's more than 2-0. But I think it's just avoiding injuries and playing consistently in all three phases of the game. As I'm not saying anything that we don't already know, but obviously the Syracuse offense has looked pretty darn good so far. Kyle McCord, the Quinn Allen, the receivers, Pena, etc. The defense struggled against Ohio's run game in the opener, but then I think played better against Georgia Tech in week 2 when they knocked off a top 25 team at the Dome. In terms of their rush defense. Special teams certainly had a couple of issues there. So it's just a consistency across the board. I'm an alleged homer, but on paper, Syracuse has a more talented roster than Stanford. No disrespect to the Cardinal. That's just the way it is. Syracuse could certainly play games later this year where the other team has more talent on paper. But
I'd argue one.
Miami.
Miami. Yep, that's it.
Yeah. So, but hey, listen, that's why the games are played on the field, and we can talk about what's on paper and betting odds and all this other stuff. And it's executing in all three phases, limiting turnovers, and just pounding it down Stanford's collective throat, if I can be frank about it. In terms of the passing game and the run game, and just doing well on defense. Obviously, Wax is still out for a few more weeks. There's a couple other kind of injuries things, but just keeping this team as healthy as possible, I think they'll take care of business.
Yeah, and speaking of the injuries, I think it was really encouraging that Syracuse was able to beat a team like Georgia Tech without Marlowe Wax. That Marlowe Wax, for those that may not know, is an all-ACC linebacker. He is the one that is calling the shots on the defense. Seriously, he has the thing where he's barking at the orders. He's calling all the plays. It's the new system in college football. It's the same as the NFL. He's the leader. He's really good. He's a senior. And in the past, and by the way, he's out for, I think, another 5 weeks with an injury. In the past, when Syracuse would have an injury like this, you can't they wouldn't be able to recover from it much. They really wouldn't. We saw it last year with a guy like Arondé Gadsden. He goes down in week 2, and it didn't really matter through the first couple of games without him, but they were also playing against, a pretty bad Purdue team on the road. Purdue wasn't very good. And who were they playing in week 4? Army, right? They didn't really need Arondé Gadsden. But we saw later on in the season when they didn't have Arondé, what the problem was. They couldn't really do much. Schrader also was hurt as well. I'll give everyone that.
Yeah, that was rough.
But they beat Georgia Tech without Marlowe Wax. Like,
it's
that doesn't have that normally with Syracuse, they have a big injury on either side of the ball. It kills them. I think it speaks to the depth that this team has early on in the season.
I totally agree. And especially because, and obviously we're hoping Marlowe comes back in, like you said, 4 to 5 weeks. And it's not just that he's a really good linebacker. Like you said, he's, got the head, he's the leader of this defense. So it's not just his one position. It's just kind of the way he kind of brings it all together. And the fact that he was injured and Georgia Tech comes in with one of the best rushing offenses in the country, averaging, I think, like 270.
Oh yeah, it was
something like that,
200 a game.
And so for Wax to be out again, given his position, but just his stature on the defense, and for them to hold Georgia Tech, I think it was like maybe 112. Okay, see,
I was putting the bar at like 150.
50. I think you mentioned that last time we talked, and that would have been fine too.
Yeah.
But to hold them to 112 with Wax out, I think that was really, again, there were some other things that were a little concerning with special teams, and they obviously had a larger lead late, and it ended up being a 3-point win. But a win's a win, and to me, it's just it was really encouraging. And I don't think Stanford has an overly impressive run game. I just, again, no disrespect, if we're just being honest, I don't think Stanford's overly impressive just around across the board. But, they're playing their first ACC game. They're playing their first game against Syracuse ever, and weird stuff happens. So you never know. So trust me, Fran Brown and this team and his staff, they're not taking Stanford lightly. I don't care what the betting odds are or anything else. And Stanford's coming off a bye week too, so they'll be rested. But yeah, the rush defense, given Wax's absence against Georgia Tech, was extremely encouraging. And again, just having some consistency across the board moving forward, and just avoiding the injury bug. I think Syracuse is really positioned. Again, it's been 2 games, but positioned to win a lot of games this year.
I agree with you. And I guess the one area to nitpick, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, and this is something that I want to see cleaned up with Stanford, because Stanford is a conference opponent at home. And, think about how Kentucky did against Georgia last week.
They should have won that game.
An inferior team at home almost took down the number 1 team in the country. Now
I watched that game. I watched the second half. They could have. They
almost won.
Yep.
So you have to take these conference games especially very, very, very seriously. So the one thing that I want cleaned up is that, Neil, in each game that Syracuse has played, they have looked really good across the board, except for that one category where you're like, huh?
Right.
In week 1 against Ohio, I think we can all agree they played really well, but the run defense was terrible.
Right.
Week 2, they solved the run defense. Everyone looks good. It's great. It's like a party. You gave up a block punt, a block field goal, and you couldn't recover an onside kick?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the special teams. So it's like getting rid of that one eye-popping category where you're like, that can be a reason why you lose. That's it. Like, that's mainly the only thing I can nitpick and be like, all right, like,
I don't even think that's a nitpick.
I mean, go on against Stanford.
No, I don't think that's a nitpick. I think that's an honest assessment. We both love our alma mater, and Fran Brown talked about it. They had to clean that up, and I agree. Yeah, so it'd be nice if, especially again, as the competition intensifies, and again, assuming we don't have some catastrophic injuries other than Marlowe, playing consistent in all 3 phases will be very important when they go up against a Miami, although that's way down the road. But, even like a BC or Virginia Tech or NC State or going to Cal is 3-0, Florida State's 0-3. They play this week. Isn't that the greatest?
On last week's ACC squad, which, by the way, is being filmed right now, I believe, as you're watching or listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
I said if Florida State doesn't beat Memphis, I don't know when they're going to win a game. I don't know where their win's coming from. Maybe it's this week.
I mean, I think
if I had to set a live over-under on Florida State, I think I would put it at like 2.5, but maybe that's being a little mean. Maybe it's 3.5 instead. But I think when Florida State, I know we're getting a little off track here, and then I promise you guys, we're going to get into bye week thoughts and Stanford talk more and more. But just a side note here, I think Florida and Florida State when they play at the end of the season, the loser of that game should go to Division II. I think it's the only way to make that interesting.
Yeah, I mean they're both very large universities with very large, I assume, NIL budgets, etc. So I don't know. I think
Florida beats them out in NIL.
And Florida obviously has a brutal schedule, but they've been two of the most disappointing teams so far this year, without question.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too off topic again, but like Florida isn't even competitive against Miami. They're not even competitive against Texas A&M. I know you have a hard schedule, guys, and I'm not expecting you to even make a bowl game, but like, and Florida State, I mean, we can't laugh at them enough. I mean, we could do a 24-hour podcast about Florida State.
Yeah, we've touched on it a few times, and like I say, I usually root for conference members when they're not playing Syracuse, but given their nonsense legal crap, excuse my language, legal stuff, I don't feel sorry for them one bit.
Nope. Don't care. I would love if they went 0-12. That'd be really fun. Hey, Locked On Syracuse fans. Have you ever heard about Roy? It stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. That's right. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. Roy changes the NIL game for fans. Directly support players. Roy allows fans to directly back their favorite college athletes. With Roy, fans can play a key role in shaping the future of their favorite teams, while athletes maximize their name, image, and likeness, which is NIL potential. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter the referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into sweepstakes to earn $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Get the Roy app for iOS or Android and start making an impact on your favorite team. Use referral code Locked On for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. But anyways, all right, let's talk about the bye week, Neil. So Fran Brown, obviously a first-year head coach for Syracuse, and not just for Syracuse. He's a first-year head coach across any level. So we don't have any sort of sample with how a Fran Brown team will look after a bye week. What we do know is that under Dino Babers, who was the head coach of Syracuse for 8 years prior to Fran Brown, the Orange weren't very good coming off a bye. 4-9 was their record, and I got that from orangefizz.com. So 4-9 after a bye. So, Neil, how are you feeling about it?
That's an interesting
do you think there's any sort of correlation? Because I mean, I don't personally.
I mean, it's impossible for me to, and you know me, I'm not afraid to give my opinions, but yeah, I mean, Fran's a first-year head coach, a first-time head coach, and I will go on and on about how I like Dino Babers as a human being, but obviously it just didn't work out, for the, over the course of the tenure, but I wish him well. I mean, Fran Brown says all the right things to me. And again, I'm a homer, I'm an alum, blah, 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 but I'm also like you, I'm not afraid to call it out. He just, to me, says all the right things. I mean,
he's great with the media.
He's so, but it's not, what's the word I'm looking? I don't think it's spin. I don't think
genuinely
so. It comes from the heart, and recruits talk about it, and their parents talk about. He just keeps it real, and he's confident, and he should be, and that's great. But I don't think he's like overconfident or cocky. I think he's humble. I think he's appreciative. I think he's confident, and I think he's just genuinely says he assesses where things are. And he's talked about, I believe it was yesterday, about the need for consistency across the board. He talked about, and I thought it was really interesting. He talked about, he said this in the past too, how he wants Syracuse to, obviously compete for ACC titles and CFP bursts and be the main event, is his quote. And that's cool. Obviously bring Syracuse back to more ACC and national relevancy. But he said, I believe it was yesterday, talking about how, this team needs to, the program, not just, in this season, but just kind of moving forward, needs to be more consistent in terms of winning games throughout the season, just really having a lot of success to be thought of as this quote unquote main event where, there's a portion of the fan base, and you and I are part of it, where we're going to follow the teams no matter what. I mean, you have a podcast. I cover the teams, for Inside the Loud House, but we're just diehards. But there's people, whether in Central New York or alum elsewhere or whatever, that maybe are more just kind of general fans that maybe will be more inclined to go to games and just really support these teams emotionally or through NIL or whatever, if they're more consistently nationally relevant, going to high bowls. I'm not saying they're going to make the CFP this year. Maybe that'd be cool.
Hey, but, the last odds, I think you just tweeted it out. I think ESPN's giving them a 2% shot.
Weird
because it went down after a bye week.
I don't know all that FPI and everything. Like they just got to win games.
Think, you know what I think it is? Sorry to cut you. I know what it is.
You're fine.
Boston College looked pretty good against Missouri, and we're playing Boston College on the road.
They did.
So it makes that game more losable. And if you lose that game, you can only lose so many games to be considered for the playoff.
Agreed.
I think that might have been why.
Especially even with a 12 team and at-large berths and all that. I mean, the ACC, other than the champion, at the most, I think would get in one other. I don't know that. We'll see how the season shakes out. So you'll think about like Miami and maybe a Clemson, but then all these other teams, including Syracuse. I mean, if Syracuse is 10-2, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, my point with all that is, it's just Fran knows that to really capture a larger percentage of the fan base on a more consistent basis is for the team to be more consistently winning. He said the right things. So I didn't answer your question at all, but to get back to, coming off the bye week, I'm sure he has his guys ready to go. They're not going to take any. I mean, didn't he say before the Ohio game, the season opener, that Ohio was a better team? I mean, so to speak. Because they won 10 games last 2 years.
He definitely did. He actually, I think, used that exact phrase.
But I mean, I respect that.
Come on. I think Syracuse, he
was making the point that, hey, listen, we're 13-13 over the last 2 years. We got a new staff, including me, and Ohio's won 10 games the last 2 years. So maybe they are better than us. And obviously they're not, and Syracuse won by 16, but so he's saying all the right things. I think I'll have him ready to go, but we don't know. He's not. I mean, it's so weird to have a buy this early in the season, but I know they have 2 buys, so I think they'll be ready to go. And again, just being consistent and, like you said, in all 3 phases and avoiding injuries, I think they'll be fine.
I think there will be a couple of things with the bye week. Number one, Syracuse is coming off a bye, but you mentioned off the top of the podcast. I'd mentioned this on Sunday's podcast. Stanford's coming off a bye too. Right. So quite frankly, full disclosure, I don't care. Like there is no excuse. Like this team's in rhythm. You're coming off a bye. Like no. You're both coming off a bye. You're both on equal footing here. Like I don't want to hear it. Right? It's like, come on, we got to come out fast.
That's a non-starter for me. Yeah.
I think the second thing is like, all right, to get going, 2 things: run the football.
Mm-hmm.
Short passing game.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get going. Like, especially when you're coming off a bye and you may not be in rhythm. Get those easy completions, like sling it out to a guy like Zeed Haynes. Let him try to run in space, and there you go. It's almost like the layup in basketball. Like sometimes you just got to see it go in the hoop.
Absolutely,
it's not even a jump shot. You just got to see it go in.
I think that's
I'm not saying Kyle McCord's going to come out and he's going to throw 4 interceptions in the first quarter or whatever. Like if he does, that's a problem. But if let's say you might sense a little bit of rust from him, and I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think he's going to come out well.
Mm-hmm.
Short passing game, screen plays, quick hitters, quick curls, run the football. That's how you get going, and all of a sudden you're in rhythm. It's like the bye week. It was only rest. That's it. Just no rust, just rest. That's what
Yeah,
I
I
want.
think that's a great point. You have a nice, obviously we don't know if they'll start with the ball or not or be on defense, but yeah, nice sustained drive, get in rhythm with the run game, pass game, nice balance. We know Kyle can throw deep throws, but yeah, get some under his belt, see them go in, so to speak, and then just light them up. Yeah, I agree. And on defense, obviously just, Stanford has a solid dual threat quarterback.
Yep.
Just play smart, no stupid penalties, win the takeover game or the takeaway game. I think they'll be okay. Yeah,
I think so too. And we can talk a little bit more about Stanford here coming up. One guy that might be playing his first game for Syracuse against Stanford is Justus Ross-Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a bye week here and everything like that. If there's anyone that benefited from that bye week, it's him because he's recovering from that injury.
Mm-hmm.
Neil, let's just say he does play, okay? Because Fran Brown mentioned that there's a chance he goes in his press conference yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
What do you expect from Justus Ross-Simmons?
Yeah, Coach Fran did say yesterday that he'll be available or participating in practice this week. I don't think he's listed on the depth chart, but I mean, obviously that could change. Depth chart comes out on Monday and the game's on Friday night.
It's funny you mentioned that because Marlo Wax was on the depth chart before Georgia Tech, and then
he was. Yeah, I don't know the reason behind that. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so I mean, either way, let's just assume he's available and get some reps. I think that the key thing for him is to just he's battling a hamstring injury, right?
Yes.
So like those, I mean, I think you and I have talked about it.
I've had one before. They're not fun.
Yeah, they're dicey, and he's a wide receiver. He's running well. They're all running all over the place, but just ease him back into it. I mean, it'd be one thing, and he's really talented. I thought once he transferred to Syracuse that he would certainly be, one of the starting wide receivers, and I think if he didn't get injured, he probably would have. But they have so many other weapons at the traditional wide receiver spot as well as tight ends that it's not like they need him. And again, no disrespect to Stanford, but it's not like Syracuse needs him if he does get reps to catch 8 passes for 100 yards and 2 scores. I think I think just getting him some reps, getting him into game mode would be the key. And I'd love to see him out there for a bit because it's more encouraging to have him be out there than not. But you don't ease him back into it. I mean, like you said, you got Haynes and you got Gadsden and Pena and Hatcher and Raw. I mean, all these guys. I mean, they have their depth at receiver, both between wide receivers and tight ends, is really strong. So I'd love to see him just get some reps because that to me suggests that he's, if not fully healthy, but at least really close. And I do think, as we've talked about today and on other shows, as the competition gets tougher, they could certainly use a guy like him being available for, as one of the key targets for Kyle McCord.
You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel at any time. And let's talk about Syracuse football for a second. They're playing Stanford Friday at 7:30 inside the Dome, and the odds have been released. Syracuse on FanDuel is a 9.5-point favorite to get the W, and the Orange's money line is -345. To bet it, just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and download America's #1 sportsbook. So I'm going to go back on your phrase on the really close aspect on this.
Okay.
If Justus Ross-Simmons is 100%, play him. He's 100%. Absolutely. Let him go. If he's under 100%,
nope, don't play him.
Do not play him. Don't do it.
Re-aggravate it. Yeah.
Here's why. There's a couple reasons why. If he re-aggravates that injury because it's a hamstring, I promise you he can be out another month.
Agreed. Or if not longer.
I'm speaking from experience on this. If you can re-aggravate that thing in a heartbeat, okay? That's number one. Number two, let's look at their schedule coming up for Syracuse, all right?
Mm-hmm.
We got Stanford this week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know, and we can get into a second, that, you know, the spread is actually closer than you may think. I think for all intents and purposes, we think Syracuse is going to win this game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you don't necessarily need Justus Ross-Simmons.
Right.
Next week is Holy Cross. I mean, like that game I'm excited for because I think that's a Jamie Tremble, Emmanuel Ross, Yassine Willis, Michael Johnson Jr. game. I mean, I'm talking about all the backups, all the true freshmen.
Right.
That's the game to get them all in because they're gonna roll over Holy Cross. That is the type of game that's going to be 56-0. It's going to be almost like Wagner a couple of years ago when they had to do 10-minute quarters in the second half. So you're also not going to need Justus Ross-Simmons for that one either. But coming up after that is UNLV.
That's going to be a tough game.
That's going to be a tough one. I think you need all hands on deck for that UNLV game. Mm-hmm. That is really going to be a tough one on the road against one of the better group of 5 teams. In fact, I'm seeing that they might be the representative from the group of 5 in the college football playoff. That's
at least 1 or 2 projections for that this week. I mean, obviously that stuff changes from week to week. But yeah, they're ranked at least in the 8 people. So
if Justus Ross-Simmons is 100% for the Stanford game, if he is 100% ready to go, absolutely, you play him because he's 100%. And I think what I mean is no risk of aggravating the injury. Like he's ready to go.
Great point, Jackson.
But if he's not ready to go, if he's 95%, hold him out. There's no reason to play him.
I was going to say, what's the risk reward? What's the benefit there? So, I mean, obviously getting him game reps, getting him in there, sure. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
With the hamstring injury, you can just run down the field and pull it. Like it's one of those fluky injuries that happens. So if he's 100%, he can't re-aggravate it, play him. If he can re-aggravate the thing, don't do it. Like just hold him out, live to fight another day. See you for week 5 against UNLV, or technically I think that's week 6 because we had a bye week. But you get the idea. Game 5 against UNLV when Syracuse is hopefully 4-0. It probably will be. I guess now is the time we can get to the fact that the point spread is actually less than 10 points. When I check FanDuel, it's 9.5.
9.5. Yep.
I hate mentioning this phrase because I think we know that we think Syracuse is going to win. And I mentioned this to you before we recorded this.
Yeah.
You think this could be a trap game? Is that what the line is saying to you?
Well, it's tough. I never pretend to know what odds makers or what info they have that I don't have.
More than us.
A lot of times they're fairly accurate with their spreads. So
most of the time they had the over under for Florida State at 9.5 wins. Guess what? If you bet the under, it already hit for you.
Looking good there. Yeah. Trap game. I don't know if it's a trap game. I think it's a game, again, coming off a bye week, and Stanford's coming off a bye week. And it's their first ever meeting. It's a Friday night game on ESPN. I think it's a game that Syracuse should win and will win, but they need to be just like with every game, they just need to be locked in. And I think they will be, given who I think Fran Brown is as a person and a coach and his staff. But, am I surprised about the line being 9.5? Probably a little bit. I mean, like 14. Stanford's 1-1. They beat Cal Poly. They lost at home to TCU by 7. It's not like they've looked overly impressive, but it's not like they got blown out in one game. I mean, they're obviously Cal Poly is not an overly daunting foe. But they're 1-1.
I literally was just like, I do not care about Cal Poly. I don't care.
No, yeah. I mean, they won 41-7 or something. I mean, it is what it is. But again, Stanford's 1-1. We're 2-0. We're fringe just outside the top 25. I don't necessarily think if Syracuse wins, they'll get into it. It just depends on what other teams do that are kind of hovering around that same area. And I don't really, to be honest with you, care about. I mean, it's cool to say, or top 20. I mean, if they keep winning games, they're going to be in the top 25. So I don't really care about that right now. I don't think it's a trap game. I think they're going to be locked in, and I think they're going to win. I actually am predicting they're going to win by less than 9.5, but that's just because I feel like Stanford's just going to, like, their first ACC game ever, they're just going to kind of keep it close. But I hope I'm wrong. We'll see. What about you? You think it's a trap game?
I want to be honest with people. I think Syracuse is going to win, and I think they're going to blow them out. But at the same time, it does kind of give off that the line is what scares me. At full disclosure, it's totally the point spread that is staring me. When it came out and I'm like 9.5, I'm like, ooh, like, is there something I'm missing? Is there something that is off? Well, what's going on here? Because they typically know more than I do.
Me too.
More than most of us do. There's a reason why, those bookies are able to, keep having people on their site, and they're able to, do a lot of things because they're generally more right than they are wrong.
Agreed.
So it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, Syracuse should win. They should blow them out. They are better than this Stanford team, even though, yes, it is within the conference. But yeah, the point spread's like 9.5. I'm like, what am I missing? Is Ashton Daniels the Stanford quarterback? Is he someone that's gonna come into the dome and just light us up? He's a very mobile guy.
Yes.
This is another mobile quarterback that we're going against. This is the third game in a row that we are playing a mobile quarterback.
Yeah. And Jackson, that what you just said a second ago is the main kind of like sticking point for me. I still don't necessarily think it's a trap game.
Yeah.
But the line, and again, I'm not like a huge betting person, but like the line, given that they're at home, gives me like a little bit of pause. Like, yeah, what am I missing? So
Stanford has a pretty weak secondary. I documented that on Sunday's podcast. I said on the podcast that they made TCU's quarterback look like Joe Montana. Okay, so if you have a weak secondary and you're going against Syracuse, that's a problem.
That is a problem.
That is a huge problem for the opposition. It's if you can't stop the pass against Kyle McCord and company, you're in trouble. So what am I missing in that regard? I know their run defense actually held up pretty well against TCU. I'll give them that. They have a mobile quarterback, as I just mentioned, in Ashton Daniels, and they have an elite wide receiver on the outside in Elic Ayomanor who could cause problems. He is their main guy. He might be the best player on their entire team. So I understand that, like, look, they have good players. Sure. I'm like, man, I don't know. Maybe I must be missing something. I guess it's because it's within the conference.
Yeah.
That the spread is within 10 points, but that's the only reason why I'm like, man, maybe this is a trap game and I'm missing something. But I'm not going to give a score prediction yet, but I think Syracuse is going to win pretty handily.
I hope you're right. You usually are. Well, it'll be interesting to see if
am I more right than the bookies?
I mean, who is not at our level, brother. It'll be interesting to see if former Syracuse quarterback Justin Lamson gets in at all.
Yes, that's right. But he's not the. See, I would have given that more attention if he was the starter. He's not the starter.
No, he's not. No,
I'm not going to give a whole deep dive into a guy who chances are is not going to play. You're a backup.
No, the other guy won out. I mean, they battled. It was a quarterback battle. It wasn't. I've read some stuff about it. It wasn't like there was competition there, but the other guy won out, and he's leading the team in total rushing yards right now, and he's been solid from the quarter from a throwing standpoint, and like they definitely have a very good wide receiver. So I don't know. I just think that as long as Syracuse is consistent in all three phases, doesn't have silly turnovers, mistakes, it has a nice rhythm. I'm not saying Stanford can't hang around some, but I just think Syracuse will overpower them just by sheer
talent.
McCord, the receivers, the Quint, the run game. If the defense is solid and special teams is better, yeah, I just think they're going to win.